Hi, I'm Paul Pujol, the winemaker and general manager here at Prophet's Rock in Central Otago. We were founded in the late 90s, big wave of development in Central Otago as the region grew and expanded. And we have 3 sites in 2 different sub-regions of Central Otago. We have 2 very steep elevated vineyards in the Bendigo sub-region, this being the home vineyard where the winery is located, the other site being Rocky Point, which looks down on Lake Dunstan. And we have 1 vineyard in Pisa, straight across the valley from us, which is on very fine schist gravels. Rocky Point is on straight bedrock schist, and the home vineyards are very old glacial terrace on clay and pedogenic lime. So in our vineyards we have Pinot Noir predominantly, but we actually have quite a high proportion of white wines for Central Otago. It's more than a third of our production. And we have Pinot Gris, Riesling, Chardonnay, and very small plantings of Muscat and Gewürztraminer, which are just coming into production now. Talk about the 3 sites in relation to Pinot Noir. They are quite different. Objective is to make very transparent wines that are expressing where they're from, not strong winery or house style. And the 3 sites are really different. They make very different Pinots. So the home vineyard is a very high elevation terrace for Central Otago, and it's on very old soil, so clay and pedogenic lime. Makes wines with a really interesting structure, a lot of depth, whereas when we move just 2 kilometres away in Bendigo to Rocky Point, you're on straight schist rock, basically the parent material of Central Otago. It makes wines that are really mineral, really vibrant, a lot of energy, really bright, even though they're treated exactly the same in the winery. Over on the Pisa side of Kopawai Delta, that vineyard's on very fine schist gravels and makes these very sort of plush, elegant, fine-grained Pinots. And so in the winery, we treat them all the same, we farm them all the same, and what we want people to see when they look at our Pinots is where they're from, not so much what we did to them. I studied in New Zealand and worked in Marlborough for 1 season, but basically spent a lot of my early winemaking career overseas, mostly in France, working vintage in the Languedoc and Sancerre, and I ended up getting a head winemaking position in Alsace sort of early on in my career, and I got to Alsace, which was the focus of my sort of French overseas tour. I was really lucky to get into one of the top domains, Kuentz-Bas. At the end of harvest, they offered me the head winemaking position, or head of production, the vineyard and the winemaking, which was a bit of a shock. I didn't realise they were even looking for anyone. And an amazing opportunity. They had holdings in 6 different Grand Cru with vineyards planted as far back as 1923. I took the job and became their first non-family winemaker since 1795. And as if I wasn't feeling enough pressure, I remember being there about 3 months and Christian, the director, saying, "Well, we've been thinking and we're pretty sure you're the first foreign winemaker in Alsace there's ever been." And I just remember thinking, well, great, thanks. Yeah, no pressure at all now. But they're an amazing family. They, very open. They never told me how to make the wines. I was able to convert the vineyards to organics, just have an amazing experience there. Like, such a privilege to even walk in those vineyards, let alone make the wines and direct the farming. So it's a very treasured memory, and so you can understand why Prophet's Rock might have a bit of a soft spot for aromatic whites and making the Antipode dessert wine as well. So I stayed in Alsace for almost 4 years, making wine and running the vineyards there, before spending 2 years in Oregon for a small organic producer, sort of on the way home, and came back to New Zealand and came to Prophet's Rock 2005, which feels like yesterday, but turns out it's quite a while ago. I had a strong connection to Central Otago. I'd spent a lot of time out here when I was at university, kayaking the rivers and skiing in the mountains. It's such a unique, sort of dramatic region in terms of its landscape that I always had a strong connection. it was really nice to end up back here for winemaking. I remember driving up onto this high elevated terrace where the winery is now back in 2005 and just being struck by the power of the landscape, the beauty of the place, and thinking, man, I really want to see what sort of wines this place can make. So yeah, it was an easy choice to end up here. It's been an amazing journey getting to know these vineyards, and my winemaking and the approach has certainly evolved a lot over the years. When you arrive in a new region, you know what you know. The process of getting to understand these sites has been amazing. I think I learned some early lessons. This is not a region you can come in and impose. It's powerful. The sites have a real presence and personality to them, and getting to understand that is key. And I think for me, the most important change was sort of philosophical, where instead of thinking, what am I going to do to this parcel of grapes, or how, what am I going to do to this fruit that's arrived at the winery, but rather switching around and thinking, what does this parcel of grapes actually need from me to express itself? And the answer was a lot less than you might expect. And so I've really moved away from elements of winemaking I thought took the wines away from the land in terms of extraction and things like that. And as a result, the wines I think are more balanced and they reflect the sites a lot more transparently than when I first arrived. I guess in terms of key elements of our approach at Prophet's Rock, I think foundationally one of the key elements is that in the vineyard we treat everything the same. So the same low yields and care, attention, the fruit thinning, the green harvest and everything is applied across the board. So not just to the Pinots, but to all of the whites. They're all farmed at the same very low yield, which I think helps to give those wines that expression of place. If you like, there's no sort of second-class citizens in the vineyard. In the winery as well, I think we try and carry the same focus on the whites as the Pinots, and if we're going to put a wine out, that it's had the same care and attention. The most fun in what we do, I think it's a combination of everything. The sites are stunning. Just driving to work puts a smile on your face. Our little team of 7 is amazing. So working with great people, and being fortunate to make the wines that we want to make. We have a lot of fun. There's some very unusual wine styles in there as well. We make a Vin de Paille, a straw wine. We make vermouth. We're making an aromatic blend now from our first harvest of Muscat and Gewürz. So yeah, it's not a chore to come to work, that's for sure. So to explain the Cuvée aux Antipodes, the Antipodes wines, of which we make a Chardonnay and a Pinot Noir, I think the easiest way to get that across would be to say it's a bit like having a guest chef. That wine, those 2 wines, the Chardonnay and the Pinot, are a collaboration with François Millet, who is a winemaker from Chambon-Musigny. For 35 vintages, he was the winemaker at Comte Georges de Vogüé, one of the most famous domains in Burgundy. Back in 2009, I was extremely fortunate to be invited to work vintage there, which was an amazing experience. And François and I got on really well, had similar philosophies in terms of winemaking. His son subsequently worked with us and in the region for 18 months. So François came out to New Zealand to see his son, Julien, twice actually. Really liked our sites, really liked the wines. And so one day he was being quite complimentary when we were tasting barrels. And so I cheekily suggested that if he liked it so much, he should come and make some, thinking he would just sort of laugh. He was making some of the great Pinot Noir and Chardonnay of the world. To my surprise, he said, yeah, that would be really interesting. And so that project started with the first vintage in 2015. So since then, he's come out and made the same parcel of Pinot Noir. So now just completed his 11th vintage with us. Since 2018, a small parcel of Chardonnay as well. It's been a tremendous both personal and professional privilege to work with François. Really, really interesting to see someone else's take on vineyards that I obviously know really well. And yeah, it's a story of sort of friendship, winemaking, exchange, and a really fun project for us. In terms of the winemaking approach with the Pinot Gris, with the Riesling, with the aromatic whites, essentially I'm making the wines how I used to work in Alsace. On a foundation of very low yield, treated the same as our top Pinots. The wines are very gently whole bunch pressed over a very long period, over 6 hours, trying to get the most juice at the lowest pressure. And then they're all wild ferment in old barrels. So the ferments will last sometimes 6 months or more, and left in the barrels on lees after ferment until just before the next harvest, giving the wines a bit more depth, structure and texture, and certainly sets them up for long aging. So if you like, I'm making the wines the same as I was working in France, but kind of dropped into Central Otago. With the Riesling and Pinot Gris, we also hold them back in bottle before release. That approach, that sort of more, I guess, traditional winemaking approach, they do need a little bit of time to open up in bottle. Our dessert wine, the Vin de Paille, straw wine, is how that's translated, does take a little bit of explaining. It's an unusual wine style in a New Zealand context, but a very old traditional way of making concentrated wines that dates back in well over 800 BC. So it was a wine born, I guess, out of frustration. Where I was working in Alsace was really famous for dessert wines. And on our sites, which are steep, elevated and quite dry, we don't get botrytis, so we can't make a noble rot dessert wine. And the seasons in Central Otago get cool quite quickly at the end, and so we couldn't make a late harvest either. And so I researched Vin de Paille, this very ancient way of making dessert wine, by travelling to the Jura in France, which has a similar climate to us and has been making that style for a very long time. And we started making this wine in 2016. I didn't really know what to expect, so I picked what I thought was plenty, 1.3 tonnes, dried them in our vineyard shed for a few months until they looked like the level of dehydration you see in those top noble rot wines of Alsace out in the vineyard. And so then we pressed it and made one barrel, which fermented forever, over a year, which turns out not to be the slowest ferment we've ever had. And at the end of all of that, we bottled 763 half bottles. So it's a great way of making almost no wine out of a lot of grapes. But the joy of that wine style is you lose water when those grapes are drying out of the fruit, but you concentrate the flavour, you concentrate the acidity, and it's a very pure concentration. So it still reminds me of that parcel of Pinot Gris in the vineyard, but almost like with a magnifying glass. And the balance you're trying to achieve with dessert wines is really difficult. They always have concentration, but if you can get those wines to finish with freshness, that's the bullseye, because then they work with food. And the cool thing about the Vin de Paille is, when they dehydrate, they don't lose acidity. The acidity goes way up. And so this lovely natural balance is present in those wines. Makes it, a really fun wine to make, and it's done really well for us.